America's ambassador to China telling
Everyone, we'll get started in a couple of minutes as soon as we have a few more commission members join us. And Clifton,
audio conferencing center. Please enter a conference ID.
Can you hear me, Francisco?
yeah, I can. In Chuck's absence, because your chairman is unable to attend this evening, is there someone else who can open the meeting?
It would be Ryan DZ if he's on. I only see Gary and Lynn at the moment.
For now,
Clifton, it's 7:01. Do you know if we have a quorum?
It doesn't look like it at the moment.
Okay.
I just see Lynn and Gary still. I see a couple others, but nobody from the commission. So let's give it another minute or two.
Okay. And do we have any commission members here? I see a couple of phone numbers other than Lynn or Gary that have joined us that can speak up.
I see Elisa's here as well. So that's 3. We would have a quorum.
Okay. All right. And then Clifton, I'll leave it you to decide how we officially start this meeting.
Yeah. Lynn, since you're the secretary, would you mind just doing a quick open?
And Lynn, you're muted currently. And I hope your audio works. I know we've had issues in the past.
If not,
Can
Lynn,
you hear
then
me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. You called in as well. Good. Okay. Thank you, Lynn.
You're welcome. Yes, and I know we've had technical issues in the past. So, good evening, everyone. I'd like to open up this zoning regulation rewrite meeting to everyone, and we've got. I can't really see who we have here with us today on the commission. Clifton, I know you're here. Alyssa is here, and Ryan is here as well. that correct?
I see
Gary is
Gary.
here.
Oh, and Gary. Okay. And Francisco here. So let's begin. It's 7:04.
All right, thank you, Lynn. I'll go to full screen now, and I'll do my best to keep up with people that are joining the meeting to be sure to let you in. So if I have to pause occasionally, it's to let people into the meeting. All right, so thank you for joining us. Thanks to our commission members and for members of the public that have joined us at this meeting. Our agenda this evening is to, as we do every month, to review our project schedule to see where we're at, discuss outstanding items with respect to the zoning update and other zoning amendments that have been ongoing, discuss the outcome of our commercial mixed-use and industrial district workshop, discuss potential amendments related to those areas, and talk about our next steps. So our phase 2 schedule, and as a reminder, this is planned to continue for several months into June of 2025, and with FHI Studios work concluding then, and the commission likely to be busy through the remainder of the year in potentially moving recommended amendments forward to a public hearing and potential adoption. We are about halfway
We
through.
lose his audio.
Yes, we can hear you. Okay. We're about halfway through the commercial, industrial, and mixed-use district work, and we're in the process of drafting or beginning to develop potential recommended amendments to that zoning. And our next step in this process would be to move on to site design, parking, and sign regulations. And that will carry us through the holidays and into January. We have some outstanding items that I'd like to discuss, and this comes from our work a few months ago on the residential zoning districts and our recommendations in that area. And based upon feedback from the Lord's Point community, and based upon a very interesting statute that dates back to the 1920s that gives Lord's Point some authority over land use within the neighborhood, similar to a borough, very much like some of the autonomy afforded to a borough. We are recommending that we drop the recommendation to rezone Lord's Point from an RM20 to an RH10. We are maintaining the balance of our recommendations. Okay, does anyone have any questions or comments on that? All right. I've got someone I need to let in. Okay. I'd like to talk about zoning amendments. And in August of 2022, and this is prior to Clifton's joining the town as town planner under the previous town planner, the commission adopted cannabis regulations. Now, the state of Connecticut in legalizing cannabis has left it up to towns and cities to regulate cannabis by ordinance and or by zoning. And it allows towns to outright prohibit cannabis or to develop regulations about where those establishments can be located, and that's done through zoning. And there are other controls that can be passed through ordinance regarding hours of operation and other aspects of these businesses. If a community does not outright prohibit within the zoning regulations or by ordinance, or adopt a regulation specifying cannabis establishments, cannabis is thereby allowed wherever a comparable use is allowed. So cannabis retailer would be allowed wherever retail is allowed, A cannabis cultivator would be allowed wherever horticulture is allowed, etc. So the town does have regulations that were adopted and are potentially in force. However, those regulations, that vote was not brought to our attention during the phase 1 process. So those regulations thereby were not integrated into your zoning regulations during the phase 1 process. We think it's wise to do that, and we don't need to wait until we're done with this phase of work with phase 2. This is a matter that can be attended to by the commission in the near future. So what we recommend is that the commission put this item on an agenda for a public hearing, essentially to ratify what was already adopted and to direct the town planner and my team to incorporate what was passed into the regulations with minor changes as needed to correct for differences in section numbers accounting for the updated regs. And we could provide some guidance to that effect. So this is something that at the time was discussed. There was public hearing, presumably testimony, and it was adopted. So these are currently in force. If an applicant for an establishment came in, this is what staff and the commission would refer to in guiding their application and make a decision on their application. However, these regs should be incorporated into the zoning regulations document as a whole. Furthermore, whenever a town does adopt cannabis regulations, the state requires reporting to the state so they can keep track. And these adopted regulations were not reported to the state, or at least the state does not have them in their list of approved or adopted regulations or ordinances. So that's also another very important administrative aspect that should be done. And we recommend doing that once that public hearing is held and these are moved forward. So that's some basic housekeeping we need to do, and we should do it in the near future. Does anyone have any questions or comments on this?
Francesca, this is Lynn. Can you hear me?
Lynn, I will need you to turn off the microphone or on your computer, probably if you're talking turn off the speaker on your computer if you're talking on your phone, because we get feedback when you don't do that.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Now, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for this update for the cannabis, and we totally agree. But I did want to go back to the last slide having to do with Lord's Point. I tried to speak and it didn't go through. So I'd like you to go into a little bit more detail as to what the Lord's Point, consideration is. Have our lawyers looked over that information? Have they made a recommendation? And does this lead to only one area, which would be Lord's Point, that remains the RH10 for Stonington?
Okay. So I'll do my best to answer your questions, and then perhaps Clifton can fill in any blanks. So first of all, we're removing our recommendation to rezone down to an RH10. That means it remains an RM20. RM20 is a district we plan on maintaining throughout the town. We do have some recommendations to merge and consolidate districts, but to maintain the RM20, and basically it would be maintained in the form of an RM15. Okay, so we would not, and that's for other districts. For Lord's Points, we would leave alone as RM20. So that would remain its own zone specific to that area. Now,
So,
we-
go ahead.
yeah, no, you go ahead. Go ahead.
So RM20 would, Lord's Point, the proposal is that Lord's Point would be the only place in Stonington that has RM20, and that we would not be changing anything at all with the RM20 zone.
Correct.
I mean, setbacks, frontage,
Right.
anything like that. Mhm.
That is
that
correct. That
Okay.
would be correct. Yes. Yes. So we received a petition from a large number of residents requesting that we keep the zoning exactly as it is. The argument being that the zoning works fine for the neighborhood, that nonconformity isn't a significant issue, that there have been requests for variances and those have been granted. And there haven't been a tremendous number of variance requests that have been required. Furthermore, as I mentioned earlier, Lord's Point does have statutory authority to potentially regulate the development and layout of buildings within the neighborhood. That's fairly unique within Connecticut outside of boroughs. There's one other place in Old Saybrook, I believe, that was granted that authority around the same time in the 1920s. In order for Lord's Point to exercise that authority, they'd have to create their own land use board, which, I don't think the neighborhood's interested in administering that. However, they're clearly interested in keeping things the way they are. We did have one person that provided comment and support of the rezoning, but overwhelmingly it was against. So our decision that we made internally in discussion with your chair and with Clifton was to respect the will of the overwhelming majority of the residents and not recommend any changes for this area. And Clifton, I don't know if you want to speak to whether or not there was any discussion with the town attorney on this matter.
We didn't speak with the town attorney regarding the proposed rezone. We've had brief discussions regarding the Lord's Point Association's ability to create its own land use board in line with that legislation.
Yeah.
That hasn't gone any further at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would only proceed. I think that would only proceed if Lord's Point itself started or created its own zoning guidelines and started administering its own regs. So until that point, we don't see it as an issue for the town.
So there's a couple things here. So I remember the presentation and the petition that was brought forward. And I don't believe the number of people that had signed that petition at that point met the requirements for I don't know, an overwhelming majority opinion for Lord's Point. I think that it was something like 2/3 or 3/4, and I don't think that was the number on the petition at the time it was brought forward to the during this meeting.
Might I jump in? Everyone, it's Jen Daly. Okay,
Okay,
Lynn, but
just
you're
a second,
incorrect. Okay, but you're incorrect because we have 50%.
Well, maybe now. Did you have it at the point that you
We've
brought it
resubmitted
forward?
we have resubmitted the petition to Clifton.
And what does your reg say? How many do you need?
We don't have a regulation that
What does the statutory, whatever it is that you have from the state say you need?
there's nothing that addresses that. That has nothing to do with it.
Was in your,
No.
I thought that was in your
We have
original
governing
slide.
powers over and above what, any other normal homeowners association has. We are a quasi municipality, but we have no standard to meet in terms of a petition. This is, thankfully, this is a one-off situation that we haven't experienced in the past. So our ordinances and our special act don't address that at all. Nor do they need to.
So my understanding from what Francesco's just said is that you would need to have a board in place, and you would need to have written down what your, I'm going to call them loosely, regulations are. And you do not have that, nor do you intend to have that. Is that correct?
We have
At
the
this
power. Should
point,
we?
you have a board.
Yes, yes, of course, we have a board. I'm the president of the board. We have a 9-member board that we've had in place since 1925. We have, the full president, vice president, clerk, treasurer. We are, completely in place in that position. We have always had the power to add zoning, to add taking, ownership of the streets and that maintenance. We do currently maintain our seawalls, our land, all of those things. We have, I think it was back in the 40s, the town and Lord's Point came to an agreement where they would do the town would take over the zoning, which has been working fine up until, this latest, issue where our residents felt very strongly. And again, 50%, we have roughly 200 homes on the point, over 100 signed that petition. And to Francisco's point, one person was not in agreement with that. And I believe that's a new resident who was trying to get a variance through. So if we chose to do this, and we discussed this when thankfully Clifton came and had a great discussion with our residents about a month and a half ago now, that is something that's on the table. I mean, we're not, we'd never take that off the table, but I'm very grateful, and I'm grateful for you, Lynn, for going back to this, because I had actually just gotten bonked off the call when Francisco went over this. So I almost missed this. So I'm glad we're revisiting it. So thanks for that. We are happy with this decision. We appreciate it. Clifton and Danielle and Francisco and Chuck, everybody, the whole committee has listened to what our residents feel is the right thing to do. And we're happy with this decision.
Right. So I guess my point here is what's best for the overall town, and the premise that we've been going with, Francisco, based on your recommendations and the recommendations of your company is, and from what I understand, what the state wants to happen is that we decrease the number of zones in the town, and that whenever we do a rewrite of our regs, that we decrease nonconformities, even if they're existing. We try to decrease the number of nonconformities. And I believe that was the reason that all of the RM20s that were proposed to be RM10s were put on the table for discussion. Is that correct?
Not entirely. The state's not compelling us to do this. This is a matter of best practice to reduce nonconformities, which is why we're doing it. Yeah. And we are attempting to simplify the regulations, which are exceedingly complex, and standardizing things by, in some cases, merging districts with the primary purpose of reducing nonconformities and the benefit of simplifying and standardizing the regulations.
Might I point out, though, that this change was not going to do anything to fix the fact that Lord's Point is widely nonconforming, because our lots are even smaller than that. So this was a problem. A solution in search of a problem.
Yeah, although that argument's not entirely true. There would have been some positive impacts associated with not only with lot size, but with setback, FAR, and some other metrics. But to your point, you're right. There still would have been a large number of non-conforming properties, even with a change from
Yeah.
RM20 to RH10.
Right, yeah, thank you, yep.
Okay, if we adequately exhausted this issue, I'd like to move on because we do have quite a bit to cover this evening.
I'd just like to say thank you again to everybody. Thanks so much. I'll relay this to our members.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's continue. On the subject of the cannabis regulations, were there any questions or comments on that? Okay, this is just a matter of following up on work that's already been done. Additionally, to that effect, there was a recent amendment that was approved of the regulations. And it's very simple. The definition of medical clinic was amended slightly to allow for medical and surgical care on an outpatient basis at medical clinics. That's been approved by the commission, so we should incorporate that change into the zoning regulations document. What I would recommend is that once we move the cannabis regulations forward, that we update the document at one time and include the cannabis regs and make this change all at the same time. All right, any questions on that?
No, that makes,
Okay, and I had a lot of background noise, so I had to mute everyone. So if you do want to speak up, please unmute yourself and then mute yourself again. Okay, and I think it may have been Lynn saying, sounds about right. So let's move forward. All right, I'd like to spend just a few minutes talking about the workshop we conducted a couple of weeks ago. We had about 25 people turn out, and those folks were all really actively engaged. So it was a very productive session. We, of course, talked about commercial, industrial, mixed-use zones and your villages. And we did interactive survey. And I don't want to take a lot of time on this, but I do think it's interesting, the feedback we received. So we've asked the first question at all of our workshops, not phrased in a different way, of course. And so we asked, how well are the zoning regulations doing at regulating development in commercial, industrial, and village or mixed-use districts? And it fairly split, although the largest cohort of people thought that they don't adequately regulate development in those areas. So that suggests there's potential improvements that are needed. Then we asked whether or not Stonington needs more commercial development, and we saw a similar distribution, with about 43% of people saying no. So that leads me to believe the 43% that responded no in the first case, perhaps a large majority of those people also feel that the regs are not adequately regulating from the perspective that they're too permissive, it could be. And then, however, about a third of people said, yes, the town does need more commercial development. We asked about industrial development. A smaller share of people thought the town needed more industrial development, with half of respondents saying no. We asked about mixed-use development or other forms of housing, whether or not they should be allowed in commercial districts. 70% of people agreed, and that's 70% of the 25 that attended our workshop. So I don't want to suggest this is representative of what the entire town thinks. But 70% of our participants believe that there is room for more housing development in the town's commercial districts. We then asked, should the regulations allow for more dense development in Mystic's commercial districts? And people, for the most part, thought no. And much of the follow-up discussion we had was concern about too much development in Mystic, parking issues, congestion issues, And there was a lot of apprehension about more development in Mystic. However, on Pawcatuck, it was a very different story, and it was pointed out to us that these villages, while there's some commonalities, they're different places and they should be treated differently. So the technology didn't work well, so we had people raise hands on the Pawcatuck question, and I would say about 2/3, close to 2/3 said yes, and about 1/3 said no for more commercial development in Pawcatuck. We also did a visual preference survey, and this helps us understand what some of the sensitivities are regarding scale of development and style of development. And what we saw was that people overwhelmingly responded to images that looked just like this. These were of the 25 or so images we showed, these 6 were the most favored images. And so there were some common themes that we extracted from this. Our takeaway was that small scale buildings with traditional building materials in a pedestrian friendly environment that have complementary landscaping and are not too urban are preferred. And that's our general takeaway from that. And then for the least preferred images, I think what you see here is all bigger in scale, more contemporary, less traditional building materials or styles, more complexes, less orientation to the street, and more standalone type facilities or complexes in general. So to put that all together, what's least preferred are large scale buildings, particularly complexes that are not oriented to the street, and those with modern materials or spec construction, or those that are too urban or lacking landscaping are not preferred. All of this informs our zoning work in terms of the scale of development allowed, site design standards, potentially architectural design standards. I'll get into that a little later. Zoning has limited authority in that realm, but there are some other tools available to us. So it was this exercise in the workshop was very helpful to us. Then we went to breakout sessions where we had discussions about villages, the town's villages and commercial centers and what those visions are. And once again, there was a very important distinction between commercial areas along Route 1 or other places in town and the village centers. So in commercial areas, some of the comments were received, and keep in mind, we're working with small groups of people here, so this is not necessarily representative of what everyone in town thinks. But with respect to commercial areas, there's a desire for the design review process, for the application process, really have more teeth and to hold developers to a higher standard. A desire to have more professional services in commercial centers. Opposition to big buildings and more restaurants in some areas. Concern about height, and so an interest in height restrictions in particular areas. And for the village centers, about maintaining existing density, particularly in Mystic, but also in Pawcatuck. Once again, same comment on the design review process, acknowledging that parking is a challenge. Concerns about overdevelopment, particularly tourist type businesses, and I think that's mostly relevant to Mystic, that comment. We then asked, can Stonington accommodate more commercial development? And that follows up on our survey. And so here we see those mixed opinions. One comment was absolutely. In other cases, it was maybe in some areas, but not others. And related to that are concerns about traffic, flooding in low-lying areas, the need to distinguish Mystic from Pawcatuck and other commercial centers, concerns about resilience, and that going back to my comment about flooding, the need for design guidelines, an interest in promoting infill development, but not sprawl. So infill within the zones you have, and and don't sprawl out into other areas with new commercial development, and an interest in mixed-use development, particularly in Pawcatuck. Then we asked about development type and what is most appropriate or desired. And mixed use was overwhelmingly at our 3 different tables. Mixed use overwhelmingly was what floated to the top of discussion. Included, however, is housing that includes an affordable housing component, particularly on or along Route 1. Having a higher percentage of residential development in commercial areas, provided that street-facing first floor is protected for commercial use. An interest in repurposing old buildings, so redevelopment versus new construction. A desire to allow heritage mill sites to be subdivided. More restaurants, cafes, and banks in downtown, and presumably in the villages is what that means. And more professional uses, this going back to the prior comment, more professional uses in commercial areas. So services, doctors' offices, lawyers' offices, other professional services. And we asked, what type of development do you not want to see? Commercial franchises, particularly near the village centers. Redevelopment of or displacement of marinas or boatyards. Very important to the community's identity and that they serve a very important function. However, there are large pieces of property on valuable land. And so we know that those properties are potentially vulnerable to redevelopment. The community does not want Route 1 in Stonington to look like Route 1 in Groton or Westerly. You don't want commercial development that encroaches upon neighborhoods. And we talk about big box and manufacturing, particularly in our discussions about the HI-60. And it's not that those uses aren't, it's not that in our discussion, people are oppositional to those uses in that zone, but they just felt like it wasn't feasible. We hadn't seen many, if any, development applications of that nature. And that type of development is probably not likely or viable. Therefore, in zones such as the HI-60, we should probably expand the uses permitted to allow for uses that are more viable in the marketplace. And then we took a look at our map and we asked about where in Stonington are there opportunities for more development. And it's primarily along your commercial corridors, close to the highway interchanges, basically in zones, in areas that you currently have zoned for commercial development. So it's really about infill development and redevelopment within those existing zones. And I think the common theme here is not to expand commercial zones into undeveloped areas or residential areas. That being said, there was an idea or some discussion from a couple of people about expanding the PV5, the Pawcatuck Village District, north, and because it's a very small zone and there's some desirable properties and some institutional uses north of the zone. So I'd like to talk about that this evening and just explore that with all of you. And so we'll get to that soon. And then support for the agricultural heritage district zones, the AHD zones, as well. We had some support voiced for those. Then we asked about where are the areas that you have concern about additional development. These were the top locations. Mystic, near Liberty Street, flood hazard areas along the London Turnpike and along Toggawonk Road. Okay, I'll pause here. Does anyone have any questions on the feedback we received at the workshop? As a reminder, everyone's muted. Yeah, go ahead.
How does this feedback, does it compare to the townwide survey? Do we know how that compares to it? Is it similar?
Yes, that's a great question. There's a lot of consistency. The desire to protect the villages while allowing for a limited amount of infill development, redevelopment, but really to protect them from large scale redevelopment, I think is a very consistent theme. Working within the existing zones is a consistent theme, not looking at expanding commercial zones all over the town. Concentrating development where we have infrastructure and resources, whether it be sewer, water, or highway infrastructure. Those were all themes that were really consistent in our discussions in the workshop and in the comments and responses that we've received through the online survey.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. It's a good question. Anyone else?
I'm just gonna say, it seemed like when I was at my table and I heard a resounding from most of
Yeah.
the tables that the HI zone was big on redevelopment or tweaking.
Yes,
That seemed to
yes.
be a huge, I think everyone agreed that
Yeah.
the HI zone was key in getting that, doing something about that zone.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for emphasizing that. The HI 60 zone has a lot of undeveloped land. It's served by sewer. It has good highway access, although there's some issues with low clearances for larger trucks. Yet the town has not seen a tremendous number of development applications. Development is not really consistent with the original intent or purpose of the zone. Some of it is, but not all of it. And so I think when people talk about potential and where there's potential, that's the place most people talk about and see potential. So we'd like to talk about that in terms of expanding the uses permitted there. Not expanding the zone geographically, but really increasing flexibility and uses. And thanks for calling attention to that.
Francisco, this is Lynn. On the
Yes.
previous slide, I think
Yeah,
it
I'll
was
go
the
back.
second bullet point. Next one.
Yeah.
One
Yeah.
more back.
Yeah.
Allow where you said something about affordable housing on Route 1.
I might need to go back further.
Maybe it's one more. You had it in parentheses right there. Second one, housing that includes affordable housing near Route 1. My recollection of that was just that that's where it has been, which is true.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that people were saying we want all the affordable housing to be on Route 1 or
Okay.
more affordable housing concentrated on Route 1.
Okay.
I did not hear that from the group at all. I thought it was more of a comment that is how it's naturally happened, that it is along Route 1.
Yeah, I agree with that, Lynn.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think that second bullet point is a misrepresentation of the discussion.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Well, I'll amend our summary to reflect
And
that.
I think some of this came out of different tables and groups, because I don't remember, in my table, I don't remember saying that we needed more restaurants.
We had three, as you'll probably recall.
We have a lot of restaurants.
Yeah, we had three different
my table
tables.
might have been going the other way. Like, we have enough restaurants. Let's
Yeah.
go with something different.
We had three different tables, so three different discussions, and with
You were at
different
my table, right?
with different priorities for different people.
Yeah.
And in which case you'll note on some of these previous slides, I did notice that no more restaurants so we're hearing some mixed opinions on that.
Right.
Yeah. And I see there's a hand raised, SR. I'm not sure who that is, but go ahead.
Sal Rataco.
Yeah, Sal.
So
Hello.
the restaurants that was actually referenced for downtown Pawcatuck, both the when we met in person and the time before. There's been ample discussion that we want more of that in downtown Pawcatuck and the surrounding area, and we've referenced that in prior discussions where we don't want to limit the commercial in downtown. And when we did speak about the HI 60, we actually talked about, possibly not only expanding that, but maybe doing away with it and rezoning that area to be more inclusive of what we actually want there. And you had actually emphasized on the commercial areas, and we did actually talk about expanding in the commercial areas, expanding on the BV5, expanding on the LS5, and removing some of the shopping centers, the CS5s.
Yeah, I think, and thank you, Salvatore. And I did mention the PV5 expansion that was advocated for, and so we're gonna tackle those issues one by one.
Francesco, I have just one last comment. This is
Yep.
Lynn again. You mentioned twice in this
Yeah.
series of slides that the feedback was we wanted more, quote, teeth in the design element. And so I'd be very interested in hearing either during this part of the rewrite or the next part of the rewrite, how we can actually implement that so it stands up.
Okay.
And, I think that's very important. I think it came through very clearly from everyone that, people are concerned with what they're looking at. So.
Yeah, Lynn, you gonna be here in like half an hour? Because I've got a
Okay,
slide.
good.
I've got a slide for you if you can stick around for it.
Okay.
A few slides. Yeah. Yeah, I understand. Okay, any other comments or questions before we get into the recommendations for discussion and consideration?
Francisco, it's Clifton.
Yes, Clifton.
I have one clarifying comment.
Yep.
I think we're on the affordable housing piece. I think the comment was Route 2 in Pawcatuck on Liberty Street, not Route 1 across the rest of Stonington.
Okay, so the desirable location for housing is Route 2 in Pawcatuck. Is that correct?
No, I don't remember hearing that at all. But maybe
Well,
different
it depends.
tables were saying different things.
It depends what
Yeah.
table you're at. So
I think
Clifton
that
was,
might have been in reference to the affordable housing proposal that had come in on Route 2.
yeah. So Clifton was running a table. So
Yeah,
Clifton, what
Clifton
was
was running a table. I think I was at your table, Francisco, right?
Yeah. So Clifton, what was your recollection again? Could you say that one more time for me?
Sorry, I cut out briefly.
Yeah.
The comment or we've heard largely, not only just at the workshop, but generally, is that the affordable housing projects have been concentrated on the Pawcatuck side, mainly along Route 2.
I see.
When we had
Okay.
when we had the discussion on, including affordable housing or mixed use elsewhere in Stonington, when it was identified that Route 1 is a potential corridor, the comment was that scale matters if we are going to propose something like that.
Okay.
So I think that's why the scale matters is in parentheses there. So
Yep.
it's that if housing does go in that area, as specifically at any sort of density, the scale of that density really is important to the community. And that's what I heard, or that's my recollection of it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Okay, any other questions or comments on the feedback received at our workshop? Okay. All right, so based upon our work to date, discussions now 2 months ago with the commission, feedback we received at our workshop, the feedback we've received via the online survey. It's pointing us to these important issues that we've been talking about. So we have recommendations that we'd like to present to you for consideration. We haven't drafted any of these. We're putting these in front of you for the first time. So we want to air them out, get your feedback, cross things off the list or add things to the list as needed. And like we've done before, we would then come back to you next month with developed and refined recommended amendments, and we'd make those available to you at least a week prior to the meeting so you could review those and we could get into the details on those and sharpen the pencil and decide whether or not we want to carry those forward as we've been doing for all of our other topic areas. So we have 7 broad categories, of which there are different pieces under each one of these, and that ranges from combine or expand commercial zones, consolidate, add, and or redefine uses. And I'll explain these one by one. I've got slides in support of these. Expand uses in permitted districts. Reduce site plan requirements. Limit the scale of development in small lot districts. Adopt village district regulations and review your floating zones. I'll go through these one by one. So I'd like to start with your small, what we call the small lot commercial zones, the DB5, CS5, and LS5, and I'm leaving off the PV5 from this list because it has a lot of distinctions between these. So I'd like to focus on the 3 of these for the time being, at least. So these are the purpose statements that are currently in the regulations, and they're all very similar. The DB5, and for those of you that aren't familiar with DB5, it's mostly in Mystic along the river. There's one other tiny area just north of Stonington Borough, which we'll take a look at that area. And we don't know why it's called DB. We don't know what that stands for. Presumably development business, maybe.
It's
The
downtown,
purpose-
it's downtown business.
Downtown business. Thank you. Somebody finally knows. Thank you. This zone is for built-up areas with public water and sanitary sewers in order to provide a mixture of commercial, residential, urban density opportunities. Just highlighting the common themes here, built-up areas, that identification or focus on residential is residential urban density is kind of unique to that one in comparison to the CS5 and LS5. The CS5 is convenient shopping 5. This zone provides small lot restricted business zones and built-up areas. Uses reflect only those needs that service local residences for limited retail and service activity. So there's mention of residences here, but it's really local. It's about the surrounding neighborhood. So there's not an emphasis on residential development within the zone. And the LS5 has a lot in common with the CS5. Small lot business zone for built-up areas to provide a full range of services to residences in the area. So that's almost exactly the, in different wording, but really almost the same purpose as the CS5. So I'll go through these in more detail. In discussions with Clifton, and it's the staff's recommendation, Clifton and Candy's recommendations, that we make some changes in these areas. And that starts with allowing providing more flexibility in uses and basically reducing the permit requirements. So to allow all the uses that are currently allowed in the DB5 in the LS5. And I'm going to go through all those uses, so just hold your thoughts on that. And then next, to reduce the permit requirements, not universally necessarily, but to move in the direction of reducing the many special use permit requirements that you have for many of the uses to site plan applications. Right, and this is all intended to really simplify the process, still allowing for commission review in terms of the permit via site plan, but lowering the hurdle with respect to requiring special permit for many of these uses. And there's a lot of nuance to that, but that's the general direction that we'd like to consider. So let's compare these. And so here these tables show the DB5, CS5, and LS5. Our recommendation is to consider combining the CS5 and LS5 into a new zone. And we could potentially rename that or keep one of the names. If we rename it, could be local commercial 5. But taking those and making them the same zone. And I'll go through what that would involve. What we do see is that the LS5 is more permissive than the CS5. The table on the bottom shows that the LS5 allows 39 different uses, whereas the CS5 allows 24. And the DB5 allows 38. So the DB5 from a use perspective, a range of uses, looks a little bit more like the LS5. The DB5, if we keep that as a standalone district, we might consider renaming it Mystic Village, MV5 Mystic Village, to counter the as an equivalency to the PV5 Pawcatuck Village, for it to be more intuitive that it is a zone that is specific to Mystic.
I mean, it's so silly. Like, I would not call it Mystic Village. That's confusing with Old Mystic Village.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that feedback.
You know what I mean? Because I think people would be like, "Oh, Mysticville," call it Mystic is fine, but I would not use the village.
Okay, all right.
Just because
and of course we don't have to change this at all. This just.
No, I'm just saying that
we've been since we have the opportunity here to get under the hood and pull everything apart and put it back together. We want to put it back together in a way that makes the most sense. And in some cases, it does make sense to rename some of these just to be more intuitive and more consistent. However, if it's not broken, we don't have to fix it. Okay. But thanks for pointing out that potential confusion that would create. All right, let me move forward here. Let's take a look at the lot standards. So if we did consider merging the CS5 and LS5, making those just the same zone with all the same regs, what are the implications of that from a lot standards perspective? They, of course, both require the same minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet. However, the frontage differs a little bit, 75 in the CS5 versus 50 in the LS5. So in most cases, we would reduce down to the lesser standards so that we didn't create nonconformities. And I'm not sure that I see a move from 75 to 50 as being problematic for these zones. These are fairly small areas with small lots. We have not yet checked the CS5 for lot widths to see what the conformity is to 75 feet, but what we see all over town are nonconformities. So there are some lots that are somewhere between 50 and 75 feet or less than 50 that could be brought into conformity by reducing. Minimum front yard, same. Minimum side yard, a little less in the LS5. We could consider adopting LS5 or maybe a compromise in between with a 0 on one side, but a combined side yard of 10 feet. These are details we'd have to work out if there's general agreement that this is a reasonable direction to head in. Rear yard, the percentage for rear yard is problematic because the yards vary quite a bit in depth. So if you have a fairly shallow yard, of 100 feet, you could end up with a rear yard in the LS5 that's only 10 feet. It's just much better to assign a fixed standard. In order to come up with an appropriate number, it does require us to take a look at what that actual standard looks like in built properties, what that averages out at, or what the range is for us to identify an appropriate number, with the aim of not creating a lot of non-conforming properties, but at the same time requiring a rear yard that serves the function as intended, which in most cases in a commercial zone, it's to provide a buffer from any adjacent or residential properties behind the commercial property. Height, in this case, we either need to move everything up to 40 feet. Most likely it's a reasonable course of action. And then maximum floor area ratio to adopt 0.5, which is not a very high floor area ratio. And we've already had discussions in prior work about eliminating floor area ratio and regulating development by lot coverage instead. So that this could be in flux anyway. The DB5, what we
Francesco,
see.
this is Lynn. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Let me just say this one thing about the DB5, which one of the reasons why we're not recommending merging the DB5 into the CS5 or LS5 as all one small lot commercial district is because all those zero setback requirements. It's fairly unique. And what we've seen is that there are properties that are built right to the edge of the property line. And for that reason, it's largely incompatible with the CS5 and LS5. And Lynn, go ahead.
I was kind of surprised by your statement where you said that it would not be problematic or make more sense to raise the maximum height to 40 in the CS5. I'm surprised at that because all the feedback we heard in the outreach session was that people don't want the taller buildings.
Yeah.
So although the rest of the columns make sense to me, indicating that you would increase a height makes no sense to me based on the feedback.
Okay. Are there any other thoughts or concerns on that?
No, I was going to mention that
Yeah.
as well.
You know, I say that based
We just
upon.
had a zoning amendment came before us
Yeah.
last month that we denied because they were trying to increase the height.
Yeah. Okay. I say that because I felt like, it's my understanding, most of those height sensitivities were primarily associated, excuse me, with the villages where we have either DB5, we have LS5 or PV5, and the CS5 is primarily along your highways, and they're very small zones. So I wasn't sure there was the same sensitivity in those contexts. But if I'm hearing from you that you feel like height's an issue across the town.
I think yes,
Yeah.
across the town, height's
Yeah.
an issue.
Okay.
Or it needs to be looked at more carefully in different zones. It's not just
Yeah.
like, oh, let's just glom this all together with the 40. It is, height's an issue.
Okay. Okay.
We might even consider saying that we revert to LS5 down to 30. I mean, I know,
Yep.
really all the feedback we've received is about people don't like the height of these newer buildings that are being built. And maybe that's another way to look at it.
I'd be
All right.
careful doing something like that because then we'd be creating more nonconformities, which is counter to the entire point of doing this.
No, we already had that discussion
We
about
just had that. Yeah.
nonconformity. So
We just had that discussion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so what, Clifton's correctly pointing to the concern about the LS5, which covers a larger area than the CS5 and has more structures, about reducing the height limit within that zone to 30 feet because there are potentially many properties that are currently above 30 feet in that zone, and that would create nonconformities.
Well, maybe it would be beneficial for us to see how many nonconformities it would
Yep.
create.
Yep.
You could make, more tables to say, if we switch to 30, it would be this, if we switch to 40, maybe we could
Yeah.
compromise at 35, who knows?
Right.
But, see much more analysis on how many more, how many lots are this, how many, what's the average lot size in the CS5s now? And the LS5s, and what's the average height size, and what's this going to change if we start changing those things?
So we're not entertaining changing the minimum lot size.
Well, I'm just saying, I know
Yeah,
we're not, but
yeah,
just saying,
right.
are there any that are non-conforming, or what's the average lot size of the properties that are zone CS5 now, and LS5 and DB5?
Mhm.
Or, not just lot size, but, height wise and
Yeah,
everything
I
else.
understand some of the other standards. I understand. So
And
typically
I mean, I don't think that
Yeah.
there's anything wrong. We have some historic buildings that are, 40 feet, and
Mhm.
they are what they are. What we're saying is, what I'm hearing from people is
Yeah.
they don't want to expand that, and if the majority of the buildings in the LS5 are not that, because I think that just changed certainly within the last 10 years, we just change it back to wherever it was before.
Yeah.
So these are the things, I mean, I think a more in-depth discussion and analysis are needed. I agree with Elisa. Yeah.
So our purpose this evening is not to decide which of these numbers, right? Because as you correctly point out, there's more analysis that's needed. Our purpose this evening is really to figure out, or is to come to some basic agreement whether or not this is a good idea or a waste of time. And if you think there's some promise here with some of these ideas, they're a good idea, but we've got to get the details right, then we'll move forward and we'll do all that work. But to do that analysis, decent amount of work, we want to make sure that these approaches make sense to you, and so that we don't get ahead of ourselves with doing a lot of work that might be going nowhere.
I guess it's hard for me to make those decisions without more understanding of what's currently in the LS5 zone, what's currently in the LS5 zone, in terms of like number of lots, how the lots are sized, what are we looking
Yeah,
at? What are we making
let me go
conforming?
back. We do have some basic metrics, so let's just take a look at the zones and the acreage. The LS5 has more discrete individual zones, and that's the table at the top. There are 6 areas that are zoned LS5, 4 CS5. It covers more area, 86 acres versus 50 acres. The DB5 is tiny, 2 separate discrete areas,
And where
only
are they?
16 acres. So DB5, well, one's Mystic, the other one's just north of Stonington Borough.
North, like where?
Well, hang on. We'll get to that in a couple minutes. Okay.
Okay, so okay.
All right. No problem. No problem.
But in terms, like, it would also be helpful to know like the number of lots, not just the number of areas where the DB5 zone is. Like, how many lots are we talking about when we're talking about the DB5 zone? Are we talking about 20 lots? Are we talking about 150? I mean, obviously it's not.
I think we
It's
can
not
conduct that
150. That was
analysis
just
for
a
the
joke.
next
But
session.
what?
I think we can conduct that analysis as part of the next piece.
Yes, exactly. I'm just trying to give ideas of what I want to see.
Are there any more comments or questions?
Sal has his hand
Sal,
raised.
yeah, Salvatore, go ahead. And you just need to make sure you unmute yourself if you're
Yep,
Excuse
that's
me.
what I
Yep.
was doing. Sorry about that. So while we were discussing this, I went into the zoning table and I was looking at what the residential zones, because a lot of the LS5 and these other zones tie into the residential districts. And
Yeah.
we had also talked about repurposing some of these, larger homes, which are most likely going to be mixed uses. And so I'm thinking that we should be looking at some of the maximum height regulations. And you see LS5 and RH10 right near one another, and RH10 height is at 35 feet. So
Yeah.
I think looking at the 35, 40 feet is well in line with, what you have for the residential and commercial. So I think that's how
Yeah.
we should be, kind of stepping out
Okay.
and looking at it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, let's move forward. I have a lot more content for you on this subject. So the DB5, where, I was just asked, of course, where are the DB5 zones? So one of them is in Mystic, but the other one is floating out kind of by itself. And it really doesn't make a lot of sense to me why this particular area is zone DB5. It's immediately north of Stonington Borough. It is, there's an LS5 zone just northeast of it. There are a couple town properties in between. And there are about 10 parcels that comprise this area with a mixture of uses. Does anyone have any institutional knowledge about this particular area and why it's zoned DB5? The area immediately on south of it, on the other side of the rail tracks, is an M1, a manufacturing zone, and then of course south of there is the borough. Can anyone tell me a little bit? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm trying to picture. So this is like the Como, where
Yes.
the fun company used to be, where
Yes.
it
Yes.
used to be
Yes.
a seafood store.
Okay.
Right, like the seafood, like the guy had sold the scallops out of his garage. There was the harpsichord factory.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
That is
I
the
But
think
area.
that's
that's
just
all in the
why.
DB5.
That's the
Alicia,
DB5,
that's
right?
all in the
Oh,
Yeah,
DB5.
in the DB5. Yes.
right. That's
Yes.
what this black area here.
Yeah. All this here.
That's the
Right.
Como, right? Is that the Como there on the corner?
Como's across the
Yes.
street.
Across the street, but that's, that little,
Yeah.
there is that little, I mean, I think it's just because it could have just been because that is that little chunk of commercial land. There's a laundromat. There's a
Yeah.
restaurant.
It's
Right?
just not clear to me why it wasn't zone LS5 or CS5. Why downtown business 5?
Oh yeah, I mean, I was on
Okay.
the planning commission like 20 years
Okay.
ago, but I was zoned that
Yeah.
before. But I mean, it has been historically a little isolated corner of commercial land
Yeah. Yeah.
with weird things there.
Francisco,
Well,
the
couldn't
only
it have just
real
been because
reason,
of the factory? The
There's
piano or,
the harpsichord factory,
right.
Yeah,
Francisco,
that's not
the
factory.
exact.
and the fun company used to be there, right?
Yeah.
It's like that corner.
Right, it's now a
The
linen
laundromat?
store, but I think what made it DB is the factory maybe. Where they
the
make
reason why,
pianos or guitars or something.
at staff level,
Clifton.
we
Yeah.
think it's DB5 is because the existing structures, a lot of them predating zoning, would be non-conforming based off the LS5 setbacks or any other
Maybe.
commercial setbacks. So that's the
Exactly.
most
I'm gonna say this actually might even
reasonable reason.
this might
Yeah.
even predate me. This predates me on zoning.
Right. So you
Um,
could see a structure here
predates
that's
zoning.
right on the property line, if you can make that out. And on this side, very close. I and in this case as well. To me, that's kind of a backwards way of addressing it. I mean, those structures are allowed to continue as non-conforming uses. It's so we think based upon this, it makes more sense for this area to be zoned LS5. as far just more consistent with the uses that are there with an LS5 district.
Well, when you say LS5, is that LS5 as it is now, or LS5 as we might conceive it to be in the future?
Either.
It can be combined into something else. Yeah, just to get rid of it as a separate, like this weird.
Yeah, so let me move ahead. So that's what it could potentially look like if we include the town property, these town-owned properties between the LS5 and the DB5. And let me go back and point that out. So LS5 in the red crosshatch, DB5 in the bright red, in between town-owned properties that are currently zoned residential. They're RM20 currently. It would make sense to turn this all into one commercial area and include the town-owned properties within that area.
Yeah, this is Ryan Francisco. I think that makes a lot of sense. It doesn't,
Yeah.
this kind of, that DB5 doesn't seem to make sense where it is. It's sort of an old outlier, I kind of think.
Yeah.
But the only thing that's concerning is that RM20, which is just a much bigger lot size, to merge those all. So that's the Public Works garage, right? The RM20.
You've got a community center over here and I think a field.
It's a soccer field. It's a
public
soccer
garage.
field.
Public
And the
garage
public
is
wor-
in
and the garage?
LS5. It's in LS5.
The garage is in
Yeah.
LS5.
Yes,
Clifton, what's this big property here on this side, in this corner?
that's
Is that
part
the-
of the town-owned property and part of the COMO, the community center space.
Community
Um,
center, yeah.
So
Yeah.
you don't
So
actually have like
the
property
the
lines on
uses-
this.
So just to close the thought on why I was talking to Francisco about this, one, making sure that zones are combined together is the most logical path forward from the zoning perspective. Two, since none of the uses, apart from a pre-existing half of a structure that's currently in the RM20 there at the bottom, those are community service uses or municipal facilities. So they require a special use permit no matter the zone. There would be no change in terms of what the allowed uses are, the allowed functionality is on the town-owned properties. So it just makes logical sense.
It makes sense to combine them into one, but I mean, realistically, when you look at those properties, especially like the Como and the town, they're not going to be doing anything there, like major. They're not going to subdivide. They're not going to, I mean, you always wonder, worry or wonder when you start downsizing it from a 20 to a 5, the potential for subdivision.
I would be concerned.
But they won't. But I'm just saying,
Yeah,
like, because it's
exactly.
the Como and it's the town. But that's what I'm saying. If you make this, you're dividing it by 20 by 5, 4, right? I'm an engineer. I
Right,
can do that.
yes,
I
your
can
math is
do that.
correct. Yes.
Thank you. It's been a long day. That you start talking about potential for subdivision. And that's
And-
more of a concern than other things like height, because then it just increases density. But since those properties in that little limited area realistically are never going to subdivide, the Como's not going to split, the town's not going to split. But that's just something to think about.
Mhm.
Right, I mean, but if the Como needed money,
To make
would
money.
they? Yeah, split
But
a
it's also very
soccer
wet,
field off.
right? They're also very wet down there. So, but anyway, when you're talking about major size differentials in lot size, that's the first thing that comes to mind to me is splitting the potential for splitting it off and making it more dense.
Mhm.
And not that that's a bad thing, but it's something that we need to think about.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on this idea? Okay, but I've got quite a bit more in store for you, so let's keep moving. I don't want to get into this in a lot of detail, but I do want to show you what some of the implications are and what some of the considerations are. So in addition to decisions that would need to be made about lot standards, there are uses, and these zones allow slightly different uses. It really varies per zone. Some zones allow more uses than others, as I showed you before. So if we take a look at this at the DB5 across, the purple boxes indicate inconsistencies between the DB5 at left and the other zones. So if we just look at the first two items, assembly, those are permitted in the DB5, not in the other commercial zones. And the red boxes indicate where something is permitted or not permitted in the LS5, and it's inconsistent with what's permitted in the CS5. So as we consider the potential for a merger of the CS5 and LS5, there are implications for boat sales. Do we allow boat sales or prohibit boat sales for convalescent homes, daycare centers? If we consider allowing all of the uses as staff recommends that are currently allowed in the DB5 in the LS5, that would mean allowing assembly, which is very light manufacturing, allowing cemeteries, churches, and places of worship, and so on. And so I have a few slides to this effect. Once again, LS5, if we merge LS5 and CS5, we need to make decisions about family child care homes.
It's a random legal question. I thought, maybe I'm wrong, but I thought churches were allowed anywhere. I thought they were exempt from zoning. Am I wrong?
Yes.
I'm
But
wrong.
let me
Okay.
explain it. There's truth in what you're getting at.
There's
but
something weird about churches, right?
That statement on its face is not correct, but there's some truth in it. Churches, their Department of Justice has a policy on religious institutions. So it's a DOJ ruling, the federal level that's applicable to zoning across the US. And you can prohibit churches from zones within your community. You cannot outright prohibit churches, but it has to be consistent with the other uses that you do permit. So if you have a zone where you permit various forms of assembly, like social halls, other forms of assembly and institutional uses, but you outright prohibit a church, that is in conflict with the DOJ ruling.
Okay.
So you can prohibit churches, let's say from a residential zone, provided you don't allow for the VFW and the Lions Club and any other places of assembly.
I know there was something weird about churches. Okay.
Yes. All right.
Okay.
So there are a lot of uses here where we'd have to make decisions. Do we prohibit those uses from a new merged district, or do we permit them? And gas stations, hotels, liquor sales for on-premises consumption. Going down the line here. Microbrewery or brew pub. You know, they're permitted in the LS5, but not the CS5.
Oh, those should go everywhere.
Exactly. And that's really consistent with restaurants. You know, restaurants are permitted in the LS5, not the CS5. Mixed use residential permitted in LS5, not CS5. Theaters, wellness centers, and implications for the DB5 as well. Like, for example, wineries are permitted in DB5. I find that interesting because DB5 is a tiny district in downtown Mystic, yet wineries are permitted, but not in the CS5 or LS5.
Well, how are wineries defined?
Well,
And the
we've got a
definitions, I'm just
definition for it.
thinking of-
You could look it up. I don't have it handy right now.
Yeah, no, I'm
but
just saying because in downtown Westerly, there's a winery store.
Yeah, it's not a retail premise. You actually have to be, you know,
Producing wine.
They're
Not just,
producing
do
it
they
there.
like call
Yeah,
themselves a winery? Like they do
Yeah.
tastings.
yeah.
It involves the
Anyway.
production and fermentation of wine.
Okay, all right,
It's
because
pretty
there's that little
broad.
limestone
You
Westfield.
don't
It makes
necessarily have
sense.
to grow it there, but you have to produce
Yeah.
it.
It's
Yeah.
the production of alcohol that defines the winery, brewery,
Yeah.
Well, then
distillery.
it could be in a small spot. If you just have to bring in a keg or a cask or something,
Yeah.
and you know.
All right. So what I want to impress upon you is that the potential consolidation of zones would require decisions to be made about uses. And I think in most cases, it means allowing more uses in the CS5 or greater range of uses in the CS5. And in some cases, it may mean prohibiting uses that we no longer want to continue in those areas. And if we still, when I get through all of this, we still think this is an idea worth pursuing, we could come back to you next month with recommendations as to how to proceed with respect to those uses.
Yeah, Francisco, I think we have 5 or 6 more recommendations and only 30 minutes. So
We do. Thank you, Chuck.
I'm taking his place.
Chuck's here in spirit. Thank you, Clifton. And the next idea is to combine the TC80 and HI60 into one zone, which doesn't mean physically combining them on the map. It just means turning them into one type of commercial zone. And that they have a lot of commonalities. They have slightly different purposes. The TC80, it's all in the name, right? It's intended to be oriented towards tourism near the seaport and the museum and all that. The HI60 had more of a very interesting combination of retail, hotel, light industrial, age-restricted housing. But they do have some commonalities in that both areas have sewer service and direct access to I-95. So there are some commonalities there. The TC80 is more built out. It's largely built out, whereas the HI60 has more undeveloped land. However, the TC80 allows for a greater range of uses, and that's what came out of our workshop was really the need to allow for a greater range of uses in the HI60. So do we need to combine these into the same district to allow more flexibility in the HI60? No. If, however, we find that all of the uses that are permitted in the TC80 are desirable in the HI60 and vice versa, then it might make sense just turn this all into one type of commercial zone and have one set of standards. Does anyone have any thoughts on this one? Keeping in mind the time, as Clifton pointed out.
This is Ryan. I think it might make sense to do a little more further analysis, but I think this might be a good idea to pursue.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
the
what we
HI60 sorry, go ahead, Lynn.
I think what we heard was that this had the most potential for change and for the development that's desired. So a deep dive here would make a lot of sense.
Okay.
I was just going to reiterate what they both said. I think we really need to look at the HI with a fine tooth comb.
Yeah.
And focus so much on that zone.
Mm-hmm. Okay. When we compare these two, we see that TC80 allows 10 more uses than the HI60. And so here we highlight the uses in red are uses that are not permitted that are permitted in the HI60 but not in the TC80. In purple, it's the opposite, permitted in the TC80, not the HI60. So there would need, and this is the full list here, these side-by-side lists is the full gamut of uses that are permitted in those zones. So there are decisions that would need to be made on things like advanced manufacturing, congregate living facilities, and convalescent homes, and on down the line.
But I'd say things like lot size and all that stuff in the
Yeah.
HI60 need to be looked at, not just uses.
Okay. And once again, if we were to combine these into the same zone, we'd likely reduce the lot size down to 60 in the TC 80. All right, so it's an idea you're interested in exploring, but you'd like to see some more detail. Is that correct? All right, Salvatore, you want to talk a little bit about this one? Because this is not an idea that came from my team, but it was discussed in the workshop. And can you make a case for this?
So expanding PV5 north. So we had looked at this. I think it was in 2008. We had looked at, and I think that's when PV5 started. It was right around then. We had a workshop with Jason Vincent, and we were looking at Route 1, Route 2, and how far up we should go up with PV5. And then we had discussed what was actually happening in PV5 and why there wasn't as much activity in PV5. And we started looking at the surrounding area. And we really felt that if you're not looking at the next sphere, in Euclidean zoning, you're looking at the spheres of development. So we're looking at downtown, and we're looking at, expanding outside of downtown. So now that we're actually, fostering development in the downtown by kind of expanding that area. So the thought process was creating a zone that would either be PV5 or an LS5, what do you call it, zone that would be like a version of PV5. And then we started thinking about, different variations of PV5 because we obviously want to focus our downtown, like we said, with the banks, the restaurants, and so forth. Sorry, my Bluetooth died. Can you hear me?
Salvatore, we lost
Can you hear me?
your audio. Your audio dropped out. And we're not hearing you. So give me an
I
idea.
had to.
Yeah, you're back. Give me an idea of how far north, along what roads. The IHRD is along the river north. The RH10 at residential district surrounds the PV5. So there are particular roadways and corridors that we're talking about here.
So we were looking at going up Route 1 all the way to like the high school area. And then we
Okay.
were looking at going up from downtown Pawcatuck all the way past Route 78 to where that interchange is with 49 there.
Okay, so very far north. And
So, and the thought process was, we would want to have some sort of a variation, with LS5 and RH10 so that this would be a version of PV5 that would be expanded. But it wouldn't be, it wouldn't have the same height that you would have in the downtown, and it wouldn't have all of the uses. Because we obviously want something that can butt up to residential and be a suitable area, to foster professional offices and so forth, as a good buffer with the residential. And we were also looking at LS5 and some comparable zones that would shoot off of that, into the side roads in the future.
okay. And I'm not sure my maps are quite capturing the area that you're talking about, so I apologize for that. Does anyone want to weigh in on that general approach of expanding some form of commercial to allow for professional offices along these state roadways through areas that are currently zoned RH10?
Francisco, just before others weigh in, and looking back in the old discussion were had by the previous team back, starting in the early 2000s, a lot of it was just kind of geared towards the incremental development over time of the PV5. So that's why they looked at the large scope area.
Okay.
I think the notes reflect more of, like a slower, steady approach to it. So not to do it as like a full swath of brand new PV5, but to slowly over time start rezoning parts of these corridors.
Okay. Thank you, Cliff.
And the general idea was to have the mixed use downstairs, to have some greater density because it is along Route 1 and Route 2 where we have high pressure gas lines, we have water and sewer. And, we actually want to make those areas more valuable so that, we're not looking at more, what do you call it, housing projects, we want to focus those projects closer towards, the shopping center and the interchanges, because, we obviously feel that in Pawcatuck, we already have a considerable amount of housing developments already. So by making the property a little bit more valuable, by having the mixed use in there, we could build in both residential and commercial downstairs. And what we had looked at, was actually building closer to the road, getting rid of some of the setbacks because we have a 51% nonconformity rating in RH10 right now. So, we were looking at PV5 just recently and actually reducing the residential requirements for that bonus build out if you have commercial downstairs to 800 square feet instead of 1,000. I wouldn't be that dramatic, along that corridor for right now. But I would say that, we want to have an incentive to have the mixed use commercial downstairs and to have more of the residential. At the time, we were actually even looking at, the fact that we needed to build in more residential. We looked at a lot of these raised ranches that have residential illegally. And this is a good way to repurpose some of these houses to actually, have the houses meet building and zoning code. So as part of that discussion, we ended up with the accessory dwelling units, but we didn't go forward with actually, allowing greater density along these areas. And that's something that we really need to consider now. And that we really need to consider having the mixed use downstairs. So it shouldn't be to the magnitude of the downtown PV5, but it should definitely be a variation.
Okay. And anyone want to provide a response to that and quickly, because I have several more slides to get through.
This is Lynn. I'm just was trying to understand based on the map and what was being said, where the expansion would be. Did I hear all the way from I'm going to call it all the way down Route 1 to the high school? Is that what I heard?
Yes. Is that correct,
So
Salvatore?
past the shopping center, past the post office, all that, and that would be you would say Route 1 from that point all the way through to the high school, and that's correct.
Oh, that was the original study area starting in like 2008, as Sal said, when they did that original look.
Okay.
That's not the proposal.
That's not the proposal.
No.
Okay. I guess I would have to see it on a better map. Yeah.
It sounds like the proposal would be to develop some sort of mechanism or zoning tool that would allow for such a corridor to be established on an incremental basis.
Yeah, I just think the thing to think about there is what we heard again very clearly is that we don't want Route 1 to turn into Route 1 Groton, Route 1 Westerly, where, they're some of them are professional buildings, some of them are storefronts, some of them are old homes that were converted to bookstores or liquor stores, and then have apartments up top, whatever. But people don't want that. They don't want that look. They don't want that on Route 1. So again, I'm not sure I'm understanding the boundaries of what we're talking about here. So I think maybe more visuals are needed.
Okay, let's come back to this at our meeting next month and try to get our heads wrapped around it a little better and
Yeah, I'm just gonna add, I agree with Lynn. I just
Yeah.
need much more visual
Okay,
things.
okay.
And I
Right.
think we can actually go back to, the proposal for PV5 and rework that.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that when PV5 was proposed, the entire Pawtucket Fire District was completely full. I mean, there was overwhelming support for it. So I think that we're going to be in a similar position, when we're looking at, a lesser version of it. If, we're also looking at it as, a version of PV5 that would eventually, get converted over to PV5. But, this could be, we could actually set up, a PV5 version 1, 2, 3, and that's
Mhm.
what we were looking at, instead of having an LS5, we would have a PV5 for downtown and 3 different variations.
Okay. All right, let's come back to this next month. All right, next, and this is pretty straightforward. We've got a real big list of uses, and in some cases, incredibly specific uses that are and disparate uses that are very similar. And here's an example of this table, and this is not comprehensive, but it's just to give you an idea. We have both assembly and light manufacturing. So can we just make that the same thing? Either include the assembly as being inclusive of light manufacturing, or create a term that accommodates both. Auto sales and service, can we treat that all the same? Bait and tackle shop, boat livery, boat part sales, all these marine type retail or service. We could probably combine all that and down the list. In addition to that, we have different permit thresholds for a lot of uses. For retail less than 5,000 square feet, site plan application. If it's more than 5,000 square feet, it's a special permit requirement. I talked earlier about reducing some of those permit requirements. So if we could just reduce all those retail permit requirements to a site plan application, we just have a single category called retail, and the same is true of bank and office. Does this approach of shortening this list and merging these incredibly similar uses together make sense?
Yeah, this is Ryan. I think it makes sense. I do.
So this is Lynn. I think some of them make a lot of sense, especially the bottom half of your list. But to me, there's a big difference between auto sales and auto repair. I mean, auto sales means you have a parking lot full of cars that usually have very lot of lights associated with it, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Auto repair usually is not that kind of a not that kind of a business. I mean, it's
There's different things.
Same with the boat. I mean, we can go down multiple various establishments and see the difference between a auto sales and auto repair. Just, it's the value of the inventory, and the parking lot kind of structure
It's also
associated with
environmental
it.
issue. It's environmental issues as well. Auto sales isn't, auto service is going to have oil disposal and potentially more, painting and more hazardous chemicals. So you might not want that in zones that you have just auto sales. I would put
Well,
auto sales
most-
more in line with
All
retail.
auto sales facilities also do their services.
Yeah,
But,
I mean,
but you
that's,
could,
yeah.
but that's something you could work on. But I'm saying grouping them together, I would put auto sales more in terms of retail
Mhm.
versus
So what,
auto service. I mean, there's just
Okay.
different, I think it's not warehousing, I think it's not that straightforward. And a lot of them, yes, they can
Yeah,
definitely be
and
grouped.
seeing now we've got warehousing twice in a row. I think the second one's supposed to be something a little different.
I was gonna say you have warehousing,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you're
yeah.
recommending warehousing. I'm
Uh,
good with that one.
So, but is there support for the general idea where we find uses that are almost indistinguishable with respect to their impact? That let's just treat them as one, combine them so we could shorten this long list and be less particular and specific if those uses aren't appreciably different? Is there support for that approach?
This
I
is Gary,
support that,
yes.
yeah.
Yes, but
support
I
it.
think I think one thing that I'd like to see is what's the definition of how they're
Well,
defined. I think that also.
all the definitions are in the current zoning regulations.
No, I know that. I'm
Yeah,
just saying, but
yeah.
you're saying like let's group brewery and distillery, but how are the definitions different?
Yeah, so I would refer you to the definitions at the back of the zoning regs, so you could
Oh.
compare those. I think if we're in some basic agreement on this approach, what we could do is more comprehensively, we could go through the list of uses and make some recommendations and maybe flag ones that we think are questionable, we want to draw your attention to.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I hate to be such a pain. I know I'm just a total pain sometimes. I'm like bait and tackle shop. There's like it's a shack, and it's on the tiniest little piece of property right when you're driving at Palmer Neck, and that's a bait shop. But that's so different. Like if you're gonna say like, well, we're gonna allow marine retail there. That's a whole different ball of wax. I don't know what that property is zoned for. But
I agree with you. I think the definitions are important, and I think maybe Francesco, what I'm hearing is you would like to everybody to go and look up, and so that we're more educated for our next discussion on this.
Well, no, I'm not.
But
I'm
if
not.
we're going to be getting
Yeah.
into detail on the definitions, there's going to have to be a slide anyways.
So
I'm
I would
just-
say, Lynn, I would say the approach would be, and not that I'm trying to give you an assignment to study all the definitions. The approach would be, as we develop a recommended list, that you can use the definitions that are available in the zoning regs as a guide to understanding how these uses differ or how they're the same. Okay?
Okay, that sounds good. I do also want to say that microbreweries and brew pubs versus restaurants, I have been on the commission when we've talked about microbreweries and brew pubs, and just getting that into having a definition A and then allowing it in certain sections took many meetings. So to
Yeah.
me, to fold that now into restaurant just seems like it could be a leap.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that are so, I don't know, they're so, I'm an engineer and I've been in front of commissions and read regulations and trying to get some to fit, and you are pulling like the tiniest word to say, oh, it fits into this category.
Yeah.
We need to be really careful with this, because I was on the commission when Dunkin' Donuts, we didn't allow drive-through windows for anything but retail. So Dunkin' Donuts came in and said they were retail. They were not a restaurant. They were a
Yep.
retail.
Yep.
And that's why they got allowed actually it was Best Eaten at the time by the high school, because at the time we didn't allow drive-throughs for food. And they said, well, we're
Right.
not food. we're retail.
Right.
Because we only sell things to go. And that's how they got allowed. And you have to look at these definitions because that was nuts that they
Yeah.
somehow got some legal opinion that said that they were not a restaurant.
Yeah.
They were not fast food.
We fully appreciate that concern.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that we're open to this, but we definitely need a deep dive and with specifics.
Okay. So if you're open to this approach, we can come back to you with a recommended list, flagging the items that we think really we want to call your attention to because they may not be consistent with your understanding or your expectation. All right. Okay, let's move on. Add or redefine uses. And the first one could be a half-hour long conversation itself, so I just want to introduce it, and I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole. Adult entertainment. Adult entertainment is not currently defined or specified as a use in Stonington. And what that means is that an adult entertainment establishment could potentially be allowed wherever you allow a comparable use. So if you allow some sort of bar or club in town that allows for some form of entertainment, you would have to allow adult entertainment. Communities cannot outright prohibit or ban adult entertainment. Well, you can, and then you get sued, and then you have to allow it. This is a free speech issue, believe it or not, and it's been contested in the courts as such and upheld as a free speech issue. What you can do is regulate it. You can do that by municipal ordinance or by zoning regs. And you can regulate it. You can allow it in certain places and not others, and that gives you some control. Now, fortunately, this whole industry sector is kind of going by the wayside. We're not seeing a lot of development activity because of the internet. However, this remains unaddressed by the Stonington zoning regs. And if you really want to ensure that you do have control over any potential future applications, you figure out where you want to allow it, you put some real tight constraints around it, and you allow it in that place. But that requires it to be acknowledged, defined, and specified within the zoning regs. Right, so we can come back to you with that kind of recommendation if you think this is a subject we should address, and if you think we should just leave things as they are, it's been working for you, we can do that as well.
The only thing I'll chime in on this
Yeah.
and why I brought it towards Francisco is
Yeah.
not addressing this in our regulations is a huge liability issue. I'd rather put it in there
Yep.
and just, have the discussion, regulate it as appropriate instead of waiting for something to come in and then the commission having to either deny it and the town gets sued or forced to approve it. So that's why this isn't before you right now.
I fully agree. Fully agree, Clifton.
Yeah, this is Ryan. I agree as well. I think we do need to define it. Yeah.
I agree. I mean, they haven't been here in 250 years, but we should throw it in there anyway. What the heck?
Okay, we can come back to you with some ideas on how we can do that.
Okay.
All right. Other items, outdoor vending, we currently identify it just as a principal use on empty lots. And the question is whether we should allow it as an accessory use, allow someone to set up a food truck in a parking lot somewhere.
Huh. Oh, wait, no, you said as an accessory use, so it is allowed.
Yeah,
it
it's
doesn't-
currently allowed as a principal use on an empty lot.
Outdoor
It's not
vending.
currently allowed as an accessory use. So if you have a principal use already, technically you can't get a permit to have a food truck
It's not
or some
allowed
other.
anywhere?
No, it is allowed on empty lots as a principal use. It's not currently as the way the regulations are written. It's not explicitly allowed as an accessory use. So if you have a retail business that someone wants to run a food truck in your parking lot, there's not a mechanism for them currently to get a permit to do so.
So what's the definition of outdoor vending?
Food trucks mostly, but it could be some other form. You can set up a tent and sell jewelry or something. It really it's up to you. We have it defined, loosely defined right now in the regs. There is a definition for outdoor vendor.
I mean, I'm just saying because it's a slide that you've shown before, but that antique store on Route 1 that's right down the street from
Yeah.
where actually I live, is that outdoor
That's outdoor
vending?
sales. That's outdoor sales.
That's different. Okay, so there's something that should be outdoor sales versus outdoor vending.
Yeah.
Let's work on those two definitions. 'cause
Outdoor
to me,
vending
those
is a mobile operation. It's
okay. All right. So
Okay.
outdoor
It's different than
sales,
farm stand.
yeah.
outdoor vending's a farm stand.
No, different than farm
It's
stand.
different.
According to the regs.
Okay, so
Yeah.
outdoor sales is a farms is like the guy at the end of his driveway with the truck with the food and
Yeah, we have farm stand as an accessory use in some zones.
Yeah.
Outdoor vending though, no.
but outdoor sales, yes.
But outdoor sales, yes, as part of like a larger retail business, and that would be something where you actually are doing the staging of
Yeah, you're putting your
materials
stuff
outside.
outside.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
I think this almost goes more towards a definition issue. I mean, is this
Well,
different?
I think what the question I'm posing for you is whether or not you want to allow something like a food truck to be an accessory use to another business, to another enterprise or establishment. That's
They
what
do
I'm
now.
driving at.
They
Yeah.
do now. So like actually allowing it as a permitted use as opposed to them just doing it.
Yes, which allows you to regulate it.
Is outdoor vending permanent or is it just like a food truck is, I thought food trucks
Not
were always
permanent.
kind of weird because they're
Yeah.
transient.
No, it's not permanent. You could establish, you could really set whatever regulation you want. In most places, they require that to be gone at night.
Yeah, I need
So
to
it's-
think
Yeah,
about that
I think
one.
it makes
I need
sense
to
for us
think,
to
I need to
address
think
it.
about the ramifications of that one a little bit more. Like give more examples of what outdoor vending might
Yeah,
be.
it's food.
What
It
the, what the
primarily,
bad, give me the upside and downside of outdoor vending.
yeah, it's primarily food trucks.
But give me the bad side. Like tell me, I need more. What would be the bad side about having that? What would be the good side about having outdoor vending? You know,
The bad side, and we can talk about this at
Parking.
a future meeting, is you're taking up a parking spot.
yeah, parking.
taking
Like,
up
do they have to then
multiple
account for if you have a food truck at? Do they have to have sufficient parking or not?
Yeah.
Maybe it's not a food truck. Maybe it's a
Then there are concerns about litter,
yeah.
congestion,
Litter, trash,
unsightliness,
Well, I need- yeah,
noise. A lot of them have generators.
Need to think about that one a little bit
trash disposal, all of those
Yeah.
things fall under it.
Whereas right now, we can allow it on a per case basis. Like, let's say somebody was having a special event,
That's
you
that's a
can allow a
temporary
food
use.
truck for a certain amount of time,
more. Right, they
correct?
come for like a day, right? They do the
Yeah,
permit.
you're
the-
not
the
even
temporary
regulating that.
permit.
Yeah, you're not even regulating that right now. That's
Lynn-
just a temporary use.
Lynn, the commission recently approved one at 779 Old Stonington Road, where it was the
Yeah,
three
yeah.
food trucks outside. That's the primary use version of what an accessory use version of this
I'm
would
sorry,
be.
what was that, Clifton?
779 Old North Road. It was approved by the commission a couple months ago.
Where's that? Tell me where that is.
It's right at the end of Elm Street and Route 1. It's that vacant parking lot. There used to be a single family house next to the wetlands. That was approved 3 or 4 months ago by the commission as an outdoor vending primary use. So if the commission, for the members that were present for that, remember that application, this would be a version of that as an accessory as well.
And what was,
Yeah, I remember that.
who was asking for that?
The applicant that owned the property.
But like, what's their, like, I understand that, but what
I
was,
think
what
it was
is,
going to be pizza or something.
Yeah,
And
it was
where-
going to be 3 food truck sites and associated seating. So just for the commission that was present for that application, put that in your head as like, this is what we're talking about.
I got it.
Yeah, but I wasn't on the commission, so I just wanted a little bit more background. So I mean, so things that could come up is you'd have to regulate the parking and how many food, you can't have how many food trucks or what
Right,
kinds of
exactly.
vending you would allow.
Right, correct.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
we
what
have
do
a
they
lot of
need
those regulations already in there for the primary use, so it would just be carrying it over.
as an accessory use? Oh, so
Correct.
it's just an accessory. Okay, it's not a standalone use.
It's already in the regulations.
Yeah.
This is just about extending it.
To as an accessory use to a primary. Okay.
Correct, yep.
All right.
All right, the
Why
last
would
item
they
on
need
this
it?
list is to permit
Yeah.
single-family residences by right in all zones.
No.
We do not currently permit single-family at all in the M1, LI 130, HI 60, or HM. And the question is whether or not we should just permit single-family residence across the entire town regardless of zone.
I say no.
Anyone else?
Francisco, I'd like to provide you more data on that. We have
Okay.
good reason as staff to believe that this is a positive or necessary change,
Well,
especially
fine,
for
I'm
the
just saying, I will
some
never, I
variances.
will never vote for that, Clifton. I'm just saying.
This is Ryan. I'd like to get some of that information, Clifton.
Yeah, I'll provide the
Right.
information for the next
Okay.
meeting because
Okay.
we do run into some issues with this.
Okay.
I'm sure you do. And one thing that's not on this list, and maybe I'm like, I haven't read the zoning regulations, word for word. I think that parking is not a primary use anywhere. Is that still true? It used to not be, it used to be true.
Correct.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something to throw in here. Can parking be a primary use?
Okay.
Just something to talk about.
Yes.
Talk
Got
about
it.
those zones like, Pawcatuck and those downtown zones. If someone wanted to come in and build a parking lot.
Yep. Okay. All right. I've added that to my notes. So let's
I might be
continue.
alone in that one, but just a thought.
The next, and this is along lines of the conversations that we've just had, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. But would be to expand the permitted use across zones, just to provide more flexibility across all your commercial zones. I'm highlighting uses in yellow that jumped out at me that are not currently permitted, that are prohibited. That's what that dash means in your use table. On the HI 60, by example, right? Assembly is prohibited, auto sales prohibited, bowling alleys prohibited, breweries, commercial recreation, compounding or fabrication prohibited, distilleries prohibited. And this goes back to our discussion about the HI 60 probably needing more flexibility, but there are other zones where we see this. The MC 80, Marine Commercial 80, boat part sales are not permitted. I don't know, marine commercial area, it seems maybe boat part sales might make sense. Conference center not permitted in the TC 80. It's a tourism area, the hotel and attractions. Wouldn't a conference center make sense in that sort of location? So this runs across the board. I've highlighted a lot to this effect. What we could do going into our next meeting is to go through this again and with the intention of making specific recommendations. I highlighted this for discussions, but we could flag these items for recommendations, just as I'd recommended for some of these other areas. And we could use a color scheme for ones that we feel strongly about, definitely makes sense, and then maybe another color for items that are questionable, but you should consider them. We'd appreciate your feedback on all of it, of course. Okay, does this general approach make sense to allow more uses across most of your commercial districts?
Yeah, as you
It does.
described
Can
it,
I just
Francisco, I
ask a
think it works.
question, Francesca?
Yeah.
Where is landscaping? Like, if you had a landscape business, which zone is that? Is that available to? I haven't seen that listed anywhere.
Yeah,
Like
I think
retail?
I think we have that under contractor yards.
But it depends what they're doing. They could be, if it's like Pequot Plant Farm, they'd be like retail.
Yeah. Well, if,
No, but what if
it-
they had, I don't know, well, I don't know, a mound of dirt, that kind of
Mhm.
thing, or
yeah,
We have specific
I just
regulations
wonder
against
if that's just
stockpiling.
retail and,
but we do have uses that allow for various forms of garden center, nurseries, landscape contractors, which would be considered a contractor yard. And as Clifton just mentioned, there are some controls surrounding stockpiling of materials.
I just haven't seen it listed on any of your lists. That's why I was asking.
Well, these lists are not entirely comprehensive. They are short lists for the purposes of focusing on specific uses and discussion. You could refer to the zoning regs to the full commercial use
Okay.
table, which spans 3 pages, I believe. And
Okay,
it's all there.
thank you.
Sure. Okay. And so what I need from the commission is to hear that this approach makes sense and you'd like us to come back with some more specific recommendations, or that you don't like this idea and let's just leave it behind.
This is Ryan. I think your approach makes sense. If you can come back with some more specific recommendations, I think that'd be helpful.
Okay, thank you. Everyone else more or less agree?
I do. I think what's really, and I don't know how you would incorporate it on a slide, but for this whole discussion, I have had the town map on zoning opened so that I could
Yeah.
go back and forth to see where all the zones are and where
Yeah.
we're discussing, et cetera. And I'm just praying that that town map is correct, that I'm looking at. So I do think that it's hard for everybody to have a really good conversation if they don't understand where the zones are in town. So how, or if you should incorporate that somehow in a slide, or just maybe everybody print
Yeah.
one out. I just think it
Yeah.
makes the discussions, it just makes sure that you understand what's being
Yeah.
said here and where the zones are. It's not just black and white on a slide. Yes, it makes sense that these uses are gathered together under one heading. You got to think about where these zones are.
Mhm. I would, and of
I
course you
agree.
can,
I totally 100% agree.
you can download a PDF of the map. You can go on to the town's GIS web viewer, if you're savvy in that way, and turn on the zoning layer. And I would also refer you back to our August meeting presentation, which is, I believe it's available online. We provided mapping in there of the commercial zones, and we whited out all the residential zones so you could see the distribution of the commercial zones. And that might be a useful reference as well.
Yeah, yeah. Again, for those people who may not, who may join these meetings and not be familiar
Yeah.
with the websites and everything, it's just a suggestion.
Yeah. Thank you, Len.
Yep.
All right, let's continue. And we did start a little late, so maybe what we'll aim for is to wrap up by 9:15, which requires me to move quickly here. Next recommendation to consider would be reducing permit requirements. Only 2.4% of the uses allowed in commercial industrial districts are allowed by zoning permit. 34.5% require a site plan, are allowed by site plan application and approval. And just short of 2/3 require a special use permit. that's a lot of special use permits, even for commercial and industrial zones. And that puts a tremendous burden on the applicant, creates a lot of work for the commission and staff. And I'm not sure it's necessary across all these uses and across all these districts. So we should consider moving in a direction, generally speaking, of reducing some of these requirements down to site plan requirement, or in some cases, reducing a site plan requirement to a zoning permit requirement. There's a lot of nuance to this, a lot to be done. I think it depends on the district and it depends on the use. So there are two very important variables there. So I'm interested in some feedback on the general concept of reducing permit requirements.
Okay, I'm going to weigh in on this one. My gut reaction is I understand what you're saying, and special use permits require a tremendous more amount of work on everybody's part, but it also gives the commission a little bit more latitude on approvals. And so I'd like to, that's my position.
Yeah.
I guess that's it. Site plans are almost a pro forma. They've checked all the boxes. They conform to everything. Special use permit, we have more discretion. It gives the commission a lot more discretion.
Anyone else care to weigh in on that?
So I have to agree. I feel a lot of our regs have been written with the caveat of special use, because a lot of times, it was a way of getting them through to say,
Yes.
well, I know, but if we allow the special use, that means, we don't have to do this every single time, because the commission can use their discretion as to whether it goes forward or not. Now,
Exactly.
I often am not 100% sure that that's the correct statement,
Right.
but
Thank you for saying
know
that. Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
how a number of regs have gotten written, and that's why the special use permits are in there. So, I kind of like them.
Yeah, my comment just largely on this is the concept of discretion breeds liability. So the commission has certain powers relative to a special use permit. And it's really relating to landscaping, buffers, design of structures, but it's not related to the use themselves. So if we establish, more robust buffer requirements, site design requirements, then the concept of a special use is no longer necessary.
That's a huge discussion that's way beyond the scope of tonight.
No,
It
absolutely.
is.
I would
want
like the
actually
commission
for this
to-
discussion, for the discussion of switching things from site plan to special use permit and what the commission's discretion is, I would want legal counsel.
Absolutely. I'd also point everyone to 15.2.8, which is just kind of what the allowances of discretion are per the commission. So I think that's kind of a good basis
It's
to
a
start the
huge, discussion. And like I said, I'm like way beyond the 3 minutes we have left.
Yeah. So let me first, I do want to say something about the idea of discretion. Special use permit is really intended to, and that authority is granted to cities and town, it's intended to be a higher level of review, right? To ensure that the use and the application is thoroughly consistent with your regulations and is not adversely impactful. It's really not intended to give the commission additional powers with respect to discretion. It's to give you additional powers of review and to invite and to require public noticing and to invite the public into that process. And that's the function of a special use permit. In effect, maybe it does afford you a discretion in that it requires the applicant to engage with you in a more complete way. And in so doing, it affords you an opportunity to influence the proposal.
Yeah,
was
I would just suggest looking at what the regulations state with regard to that
Yeah.
discretion.
I was just expressing my opinion.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm hesitant to give up our special use permits. Some things, yes.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into site plan regulation, requirements and all that at a way later date.
Yeah.
And maybe some of this will all mesh when we start talking about what's required with the site plan and what's required with the special use permit. And I think one of the problems I'm having with this process in general is we're looking at these individual zones, but we haven't talked about the general, the site plan requirements and all that sort of stuff, which maybe so some of these conversations might be moot when we talk about what we're going to require with the site plan. So I'm just saying, it's just me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I sometimes need to see everything in a huger picture, and I'm new to the commission. I only got on, a month ago, and talking about the special use permit and the different, the class one, what it's, type 1, type 2, special use permit, seeing like all those things and what's encompassing and all the applications that need to come in might help define what's the difference between these things. Because we might say, well, we don't need a special use permit if we have, this plan for a site plan. Like if we have like, a better something,
So I would advise you to
You
refer
understand
to
what I'm saying?
I do, and I believe Clifton does as well. I would advise you to refer to the zoning regulations, which
Yeah, I've read them.
specifies.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. It really does lay out all the requirements of the site plan and
No,
special
I know that, but
permit.
some of
and-
it, I'm going to be a little bit mean. Some of that is your job. I mean, we're paying you to do this. And, I'm telling you, like, I want to know the difference between all these things and put together a slide that says for a site plan, you need this, for a special use permit, you need this. And for these zones, you need this.
I'd interject in defense of Francisco and say,
I'm
part of
saying he's
that's the
doing a great job. I don't
responsibility
mean
of
to
the
be mean.
commissioners.
I mean, I'm not trying to be really bitchy
Yeah,
about this, but
I realize you're just now coming to the process, and we've been at this for close to 2 years now, and so we've done all that work. And with respect to permit requirements, site plan and special permit, one of our last tasks in this phase of work, the scope of work, is to review all those requirements and open all of that up. So our work is somewhat iterative in nature, where we will be addressing some other issues a little later on in the process because we can't do it all in 1 month or all in one meeting, clearly. And so it affords us an opportunity to delve into some of those items later. So we'll get there, right? But we have to take it step by step.
Francisco,
Right,
in the interest of time.
Yeah, I think we need to
should
end.
move on.
Yeah, I think we need to close out on this one this evening.
Yeah, we can catch it
And
up at the
pick it
next
up.
meeting.
Yeah. Thank you, Clifton. So let me go to just jump ahead. So our next meeting would normally be, sorry about that, would normally be on the 27th, but I think as you can all see from that cute turkey I put on the calendar, that the 28th is Thanksgiving.
I won't be here.
Yeah. So is it possible for us to move our regular meeting date ahead by a week to November 20th at 7 p.m.?
So this is Ryan Clifton. Do we have a meeting on November 19th?
We should have a meeting on November 19th.
So back to back, but I mean, yeah, it would make sense to move forward because obviously that next week's not going to work for most everybody.
I'll work with Francisco to, or I'll work with the commission in Francisco to see what's everyone's availability for that date. And if we need to make a poll or something to find out another suitable date, we'll do that.
Okay.
Also, you know what, Clifton? I just wonder what December looks like then. Because I'm looking at the calendar real quick here. So we just
And-
look at November and December together, maybe?
December presents us, Lynn, thank you for bringing up December, presents us the same conflict where Christmas is on the 25th, whereas the 18th does not conflict with, I don't believe it conflicts with any other holidays. I'm not saying Hanukkah here, but so the 18th, once again, we need to move it to the third Wednesday of the month instead of the fourth to avoid Christmas as a conflict.
We have our next commission meeting in person on November 4th. So I think at that time I'll make a note to ask the commission what the best date for that will be for both
Great.
November and December.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And with that, that concludes our meeting. So our next meeting, whenever that is scheduled, what we will do is I will follow up in between now and then on all the items we discussed, and we can get into further detail on those, and then we'll conclude. We'll also conclude the what I had prepared for this evening's discussion. We'll get through that material as well. Okay.
Yep. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Good night. It's a very productive meeting. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.